Games rated E to M. Welcome to Nintendo Power Podcast. This episode, we share tips for Super Mario Maker 2 from the experts in Nintendo Treehouse. My name is Chris Slate, and joining me today are Morgan Ritchie from Nintendo Treehouse. Hi, Morgan.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on. And Eric Smith, also from Nintendo Treehouse. Hi, Eric.
Hey, what's up?
Nothing much. Just thanks for coming on the show. You know, we just had an episode a couple weeks ago right after E3, but I really couldn't wait a whole other month to talk about Super Mario Maker 2. But it comes out today, the day that we're releasing this episode, and people are finally going to be able to get their hands on the game. And as they start to build their own courses, I thought it would be cool to get a few pointers from you two. And, first off, not everyone might know this, but you created the courses that were used during the Super Mario Maker 2 Invitational 2019, which was held just before E3. And I wanted to ask, what was that whole experience like, building those courses, testing them out, and also want to see how you guys reacted to how they performed during the event.
Morgan, you want to start that out?
Yeah, and I think to most properly answer the question, I have to rewind a little bit. We actually had the good fortune of working not just in localization on Super Mario Maker 2, but also on the original Super Mario Maker, and as part of that, we also ended up making the courses for the NWC 2015.
Correct. And 2017.
And 2017.
Yeah.
And it's funny because...
If I could interrupt, I think I remember that your some of the first courses you made were actually put on the disc for the original Super Mario Maker. Isn't that right?
Correct, yeah. The NWC 2015 1 through 4 made it onto the disc.
But back then in 2015, I mean... it wasn't necessarily that we were sort of had this pedigree of being level designers,
right.
But working in localization, we were working on Super Mario Maker, and we had played it probably more than anybody in North America at that time,
right.
or at least at NOA,
Yeah.
And so we just it was sort of like, we want to feature this game in the World Championships. Yeah. Like, we need some levels. Can you guys make some levels? And it sort of led us down this path. Which is still going. So yeah, it was really cool to get a chance to sort of make them again for this Invitational.
Yeah, it was. It's been an awesome experience. As Morgan said, we kind of were the first people in the Western Hemisphere to have this much experience with the original Super Mario Maker. And obviously we've played every 2D Mario game ever made, pretty much every Mario game ever made.
That's true. I think I have.
Yeah, I think I have too. Just because I love Mario, so. It was an honor, really, to be able to make the courses for all of these NWC Nintendo World Championships tournaments.
Yeah, tournaments. Yeah, and it was interesting because in the first Nintendo World Championships, making the levels was sort of. I've learned so much about making good levels. Since then, almost since the game's come out, because once the game came out, you sort of had this mass, everybody making courses for all these other, the Games Done Quick events, just the mass amount of, you're watching streamers play courses. But in the original Nintendo World Championships in 2015, I mean, we wanted the levels to be compelling, but nobody had really seen the game at that point. So I look back at some of those courses and I'm like, man, why did I do that? Why did I put that enemy in that box, control the player like that? But also we wanted those wow moments, and nobody knew you could even do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
We also didn't have checkpoints back in that version thing. So I know you're asking us about the Invitational, but rewinding back, I had to sort of go back. I rewatched those courses, rethought about those courses, and then when making for the Invitational was like, okay, this is not an unknown thing. Mario Maker is a known, quantity at this point. Mm-hmm. There's been so many courses created by the community, but now we have a chance to showcase Super Mario Maker 2 and also sort of put to bear all of the things we've learned about making courses that we think are cool and fun and polished. And I think that inspired. I think I'm more proud of the courses we made for this one than the original, because we didn't have the sort of wow factor of the game being this unknown thing and being able to rely on these amazing visual moments and on what you can do that. At this point, a lot of this stuff was known in the community and sort of in our Nintendo Direct about Super Mario Maker 2. So it became really more about really quality course design, hopefully treating the player fairly, wow moments for the viewer and the players, things like that.
Yeah, for the most part. But there's also that element of, we want to show off everything that's new in this game, that's in the game in general. So there's this delicate balance of making a course or courses that are truly competitive, that don't have a lot of kind of like this RNG, like random elements where one player is going to be treated unfairly and the other's going to gain an advantage because of that.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to balance that with like, we also want to show everything that this game can do. So it is this delicate balance of creating something that is super competitive, but maybe not exciting to watch because there's not those wow moments.
Yeah.
And something that is going to showcase a lot of those awesome moments. Like I remember there was a course for NWC 2015 where it's like this kind of maze puzzle thing where you come up to these 4 doors that are numbered and you walk into this door and you don't know what's on the other side. One player might choose the right path and gain an advantage. The other player might open the door and see like 3 giant Bowsers, staring them down. And, at the competition that was a huge wow moment. And I remember being there and hearing the crowd like, just kind of like gasp in shock that there were 3 Bowsers like stacked on top of each other.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that was something that might not, if this was like a pure just like competition, that might not be fair to do to the player, but like we also trying to show the game off. So.
Yeah. And making courses for events like this, you sort of have to think about the player and the viewer. So you're making courses that you want the players to, have fun playing, to be a challenge, but you also want the viewer to have a good time too. So there's a lot of things I think I might do if I was making a course just to put online and sort of challenge just players. But when there's a whole audience watching, you don't want players to get too far ahead of one another. You kind of want there to be that tension of, can this person in second place catch up? You want, and in this case, we even, we had courses in each of the different game styles, but also we wanted to show off, like, for example, like playing co-op. And Eric actually was the one that I was like, it was Eric and I and also Ethan Dill in the Treehouse made the courses. We sort of picked, okay, who wants to do 3D World? And Ethan did that one, and Eric was like, I want to do the co-op one because we knew we wanted to have a co-op. So I was so glad that Eric like grabbed onto, I'm up for making a co-op course because I don't know how he did it, but yeah.
Yeah, that was a super fun process, and again, that's something we didn't have local multiplayer in the past Mario Maker game. It was a solely essentially single player experience. So now that we have that local multiplayer, I wanted to showcase something where 2 players could work together to accomplish their goals. And it was a really interesting design process because I kind of had to, in that initial like design, I had to like think about how 2 players are going to go through this and kind of like hold the 2 controllers and try to play through it and see if it worked. And then obviously like there's a ton of play testing. We grabbed dozens of people from across the Treehouse, from the testing department, and we ended up changing the courses a lot from that initial design, but it was definitely something where you have to let people play and then watch and then tweak, and it's just so iterative. And Morgan's throwing out suggestions. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, and throwing that in, and we're all just kind of helping each other out.
I think that's so important, is having people play test your levels, because no matter how good of a course creator you are, no matter how great your ideas might be, you never quite can guess exactly what the player's going to do and what they're going to try. And it could be things that you never thought of. And in some cases, that can kind of really undo everything that you've put together. Someone could find a way to skip over this whole great portion of a level that you created and spent so much time on. And so, I think in general, getting your friends or your family to play these levels is great, but that's got to be on a whole other level when that not only is this a competition, like you said, where you want there to be an even playing field, but then everyone's going to be watching. That must have just really increased the pressure to make sure that these levels are really polished and really tight.
Oh, totally. Because as Morgan said, you want the players to kind of like go through it at the same speed, or like kind of be at the end. Like I don't know if you want to talk about your design process for in 2019, that final boss encounter with the icicles.
Yeah, so I ended up sort of being the one that made the course for the final round, and I knew it would be 2 players playing at the same time, and I wanted the course to sort of have, being the final round, I really wanted to have sort of to feel large and grand and sort of have a really cool aesthetic, and of course I had to have a Bowser fight. I mean, I feel like, it just felt right, but the minute you add Bowser in Super Mario Maker, you've got the RNG factor, you've got, he's a little, if you just put him on the ground, he's kind of, he's jumping around, he's shooting fire like randomly. If you have a mushroom or super flower, you can just sort of damage boost your way through him, like take a hit, and when you're blinking, just run past him.
That feels cheap, and it's kind of anticlimactic at the very end of a competition like that.
Yeah, so I was like, I gotta have I probably spent a week sort of tinkering with this final boss fight where I was like, I gotta have Bowser, I'm gonna have lava, and I was like, I'm gonna attach Bowser to one of the tracks so you can't get past him. Then I kept having to I would fill in all of the blocks around him, but I didn't want it to feel too cramped. But there's a point where to not let somebody sneak past him, you have to sort of pack him in pretty tight. I was like, well, if I don't want someone to be able to damage boost their way past him, so I'm not going to give you any power-ups in that. So there's all these little things that end up going into the overall course design. We're like, okay, no power-ups because I don't want someone to ever have a chance to take a hit. But because of that, you don't want it in that course. It sort of starts out in a Bowser's castle, and then I knew I'd have a subworld that I wanted to be vertical, and I got into sort of the ice idea. And then once I had the ice, I was like, oh, it's fire and ice. I was like, that's really cool. And then I was like, well, there's no reason icicles can't be in the castle too. Right. That's kind of cool. That's the ice castle.
And just the color, the contrast.
I get really into the aesthetic stuff, and that's one of the neat things about having sort of a reason to sit at your desk and spend an entire day making a course, and knowing that it's gonna sort of get this large viewership. There's sort of a lot riding on it. It gives you the reason to go all in on everything: gameplay, aesthetic, play testing, the kind of stuff that I'd like to think that I would do that when I'm making stuff at home, but it's like you have this extra motivation to go way above and beyond, and I love that because I feel like, I don't know the hours we put into this. I
wasn't counting, but it's a lot.
But yeah, it was a lot. And yeah, just tinkering around. I made a boss fight with Bowser. Probably I made something and then wiped it out. Made something, wiped it out. It took the 6th iteration till I kind of got figured out. Wait, I can stand on the icicles and we jump off, then they can hit Bowser, and I can do this, and it's just sort of all. I'd love to say that I had this whole plan in mind when I set out, but a lot of it it's that iteration, play test, seeing what people sort of, what they think, wow, when someone's like, wow, that's really cool. You're like, okay, I'm on the right track. This is getting somewhere.
Yeah. Now, during all those countless hours that you guys worked on those levels and all the levels before, what are, especially for Super Mario Maker 2 specifically, all of the new features and the new parts that have been added, what are some things that you discovered about some of these new parts, and maybe what are some of your favorites? And you can give us any tips on how to maybe incorporate those into levels that people might not necessarily know straight when they start playing the game.
Sure, yeah. We, for the championship levels, you may have noticed there's a lot of on-off switches in there, which are a new course element. And basically those interact with a bunch of other objects. So there was this awesome moment in that last level, Morgan, where you get to the end of that first section and what's the name of that thing?
The skewer?
The skewer, yeah. So the skewer comes up and hits the on-off switch and basically turns off these blocks that one of the competitors was hoping to land on, and just he face plants into the lava. And everyone was like, oh, they felt it was kind of trolly. Yeah. But he had a chance to, you gotta be aware of your surroundings, man.
Yeah.
It was right there, and it's like the skewer interacts with those on-off switches and can turn off blocks, and then same thing with icicles, interact with on-off switches. The shells interact with on-off switches. So there's in the co-op one I made for this last championship, there's this section where you go through a pipe, and both players kind of have to time their jumps on these platforms. But the platforms are switching on and off by themselves. And that's because there is a cannon that shot out a shell and is kind of bouncing back and forth off a wall and then off the on-off switch, turning all the platforms in the area on and off at a very steady rhythm.
Kind of recreating the blinking block almost from the Super Mario 3D World style.
Exactly, yeah. And then you can kind of vary the speed at which that's turning on and off by, making the wall that it's bouncing off on the opposite side farther away. So there's so much you can do with on-off switches.
Yeah, I think people are going to go completely nuts with those because, there's so many ways to trigger them. You can have the player just jump and hit it. You can have enemies trigger it. You can have skewers hit it. You can even have thwomps trigger them, but the thwomp you have to be close enough to, you can have a sideways thwomp trigger on-off switches, but the thwomp won't move sideways until you get close enough to trigger it. So that's completely different, like a skewer that's just going to keep going in and out on its own rhythm if you're close enough. And even icicle, I got really obsessed with the icicles. That's actually one of my favorite things. the minute parts, especially the icicles that if you get close enough, they fall and then they respawn, and they'll hurt you if you hit them from the bottom. You can actually stand on top of them, but they can also trigger on-off switches. And I started making this at one point in the course I made for the final of the Invitational. I realized you can have an icicle, a falling icicle hanging above an on-off switch, and if you sprint under the on-off switch, it will have triggered it to fall, and like it will fall behind you and trigger the on-off switch, and that could like make blocks turn on in front of you. So I had this whole section where you have to sprint under an on-off switch, jump, and then the icicle falls like way in your wake, and then you're jumping under another one, and the blocks are turning on in front of you. But then I realized like it's totally unfair for somebody to do that in like a blind speedrun competition. But I was really into that idea of just how I had been spending hours and hours playing around with icicles, and it wasn't until I randomly happened to sprint under one and it fell behind me that I was like, man, the kind of things I could do with that. Right. And I love those moments of discovery, even with things you think you kind of know all the ways certain parts can interact, and then you find some new, interaction, and that just inspires like a whole new line of thought. Like, I need to make a whole new course to like see that out.
Right. And that's a great point that you made about, it kind of being too hard for a blind speed run. There were a lot of times in these competition courses where players, lost because they got, fell on spikes or something like that.
Yeah, they like fell to their doom or fell in lava or
exactly.
hit a spike.
But for the most part, you don't want to bog down the viewership, because every time someone loses, they have to start over at the very beginning. So it's like you want to make a course that's hard to get through, but it's hard to get through quickly, but not necessarily hard to get through.
Yeah. Even a couple years after the original Nintendo World Championship in 2015, the dev team in Japan actually asked us if we could make a course for one of their events, and which was a huge honor to us to have them reach out to us. And they wanted it to be the final, because they just, they were inspired by some of the things we had done. They're like, it's different than what we would think of. We want to see what you do for this. And I remember we made it, we're like, okay, this is going to be for the final round. It's going to be 2 players at the same time. And we definitely want those players to stay as close as possible. So we intentionally, our number one, like we set out and we were like, let's let the player not be able to lose a life in this course, like period.
Right.
And that was really fun because we had, it's kind of come along the way to get that point.
But it's actually really hard to do. To make a course where, the player can't lose a life is
it's actually very challenging. And we had to come up with all these tricky jumps and tricky things. And like, it almost ended up feeling like this super challenging, like obstacle course or something, because you had to do all the sort of calisthenics and acrobatics you'd have to do as a Mario player, but there was never sort of that fear of like, oh, if I do that, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna have to start over.
Right.
And again, not that we did that for every one of the courses in the Invitational, but we definitely sort of kept that in mind.
That's something that's been on my mind, just creating my own courses, is thinking about them eventually being downloaded and played by other people. Is ideally I would like to make the course, challenging, but not to where you're constantly, getting stuck, or certainly not getting frustrated or losing a lot of lives. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes there's this particular challenge, and I think, well, as long as it's clear and fair, even if it's difficult, that's okay. And maybe that bumps this level up into kind of the expert or super expert category. But for example, there's one room that I just put into a level I was creating that all it is you walk into the room, there's a checkpoint flag, and there's a big pit, and on the other side of the pit is a key. So to get the key, you have to just jump the big pit, but it's too wide. But in the center of the ceiling is a pipe that is constantly spawning dry bone shells that are parachuting down slowly through the middle of the screen into the pit. So if you can leap into one of those and then leap back out of it before it drops off the bottom, that's how you get across. And when you nail that, when you get the timing right on that, it feels so good, and it's a little bit more of an advanced move, and I love having it in there. But anytime I have someone play it, they lose at least half a dozen lives before they even get across the first time, and then they have to make it back. So I guess you're always thinking about balancing things out, and is not only is is this going to be a fair challenge, but is it presented enough to the player that they understand if they do lose a life that it was ultimately their own fault and not because the game cheated them somehow.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that sort of reminded me of something that I feel like it's taken me a long time to sort of fully sort of decide this philosophy or realize this sort of thing for myself. But, I come to, especially when the first Mario Maker came out, Super Mario Maker, I used to be really into Super Mario Bros. And there was a point where I got into speedrunning Super Mario Bros. Not on the level that some of the, like, obviously the people that have world records and things like that. But I got to the point that I could basically run as fast as I could, beat Super Mario Bros. Using warps, but basically never letting go of run. So you're basically making all the long jumps. And so when Mario Maker came out, I was so excited I'm so into those long jumps, those full on, you're holding run, you're jumping as far as you can and then jumping again. And you can use the Mario sort of trail in Mario Maker to sort of, you can make those long jumps. So I was making all these courses where you have to do these perfect long jumps. And then I realized, wait a second, like when those courses, when people speedrun, Mario games, it's not like the courses were designed for speedrunning. People just figured out how to get through them as fast as possible. So even though I love being able to get through courses quickly with really challenging jumps, I've sort of realized that that's almost like the secondary, that sort of comes second on, like a really good course should sort of be its own thing. And also if you want to get through it quickly, that's great too. So in the level I made for the Invitational, there's some ways to get through it a lot quicker than the people did live. And I felt like they probably wouldn't figure out those bigger jumps in the moment, but I liked that they were in there. So I sort of intentionally was, we even sent the courses to the dev team in Japan to review them before we sort of consider them final to be shown on stage and on these events. And they even brought up that they're like, hey, do you know that if you do full big jumps in this section, you can skip that thing? And I'm like, they're like, if that's intentional, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And it was really cool that they called it out, but also I felt, I was like gratified. I was like, yes, that actually is intentional. I like when there's both sort of an easy route that's slower and a hard route that's faster but more dangerous. So I always try to work that into my course design philosophy now, is not worry about like starting off with those super, super big technical jumps with no room for error. But when you're playing through the course, then trying to do that on top of it, and then maybe adjusting some things so that somebody on a second playthrough or third playthrough or going for speed could link things in a way that might not have been sort of, you wouldn't have realized that the first time through.
Yeah, and I think 2D Mario games, like mainline games, do that really well too. I mean, that's kind of a hallmark of a Mario course, is there's multiple ways to get through it, kind of a beginner route and an expert route.
Yeah.
Not only does that add depth to it, to be honest, it makes developing the course easier, or like designing it easier, because as you're testing, you've played this thing a bunch of times and you can basically start the course and get to a trouble spot or something you're trying to work out, because a fast way to get to the spot you actually want to test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to have multiple rounds of testing before you upload a course. Like before, what I've done is I've gone through a course and said I'm decidedly not going to hit the run button and see if I can get through this and see if there's still ways to do it for people that don't often use the run button. Then I'll go back through it and try to do a speed run. And anytime I, for example, enter a new screen and maybe immediately, jump, but I just happen to have an enemy that's placed at a certain point where if I do that, I'm going to hit them, I might move that enemy a space forward or backward. Then you start fine-tuning it so that if people do want to really get into speed running it, it's satisfying on that level too. And one thing I did before is I used to like to put secret hidden like warp areas in some of my levels for the original Super Mario Maker, where you could basically skip the entire stage. But then I did that and I realized that once people figure that out, it kind of ruins the fun of anyone trying to beat world records on it.
Yeah.
So it kind of removes it from speedrunning contention. So you have to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the speedrunning aspect of it. And trying to shave, that. I know that me and you in Super Mario Maker went back and forth on a bunch of stages, like trying to shave off like milliseconds from each other's times, sort of thing. And I absolutely love difficult courses. I love to create difficult courses. I think that's one thing Super Mario Maker does really well, is that in a mainline 2D Mario game, it's hard to include those types of courses that are just brutally difficult, because you're generally aiming those courses at a very small part of the overall player base, the people who are masochists and love playing those really, really difficult courses. In Super Mario Maker, we also had these official courses, and there were these official course creators online, and the Bowser courses online are some courses that I made that kind of embody that, that really difficult course that you're going to take 50 tries to get through, but it feels so good when you finally get through it.
Yeah, I think challenge is great. I think people just need to be careful that what they're asking people to do is something that they have a good shot at figuring out or understanding. one of the things that I kind of encountered with this same level that I mentioned earlier, where I created the dry bone shell, I themed a lot of things around the dry bone shell, but it's a new element in this game, and I have to remember that people don't necessarily know that you can do a ground pound while you're in a dry bone shell, or that if you press down, that you become a pile of bones and are invincible for a few seconds. So I tried to build the level in ways that it kind of forces you to learn those elements before you can proceed, and gives you some safe spots to kind of do that. And then I even went a step further, and in the you can now add description text to each of your levels.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
I even added the dry bone shell controls. Basically, was this description text for that level. So I think it's fine to offer challenge, but I think as you would maybe be taught in the tutorials in the Yamamura's Dojo section of the game, is always keep the player in mind, and don't necessarily think that it's going to be great if you stump the player. Ultimately, what you're hoping the player does with your level, whether it's challenging or not, is just that they enjoy themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and I love in the Yamamura's Dojo and Super Mario Maker 2, not just the lessons, but it's so simple, but just that you can look at the controls for every style, because there's some of those jumps, like in 3D World you can do I don't even know the name of it. You hold down for a few seconds and then jump, and you do kind of this backflip jump, and like I don't even know yet. Like, could I make a course where you have to do that jump? And yeah, that the player might not realize that, but maybe you could put that in the description, or just call it name the course backflip master or something, because there's all of those. Every style has, well, maybe not the original, but all the styles have these extra jumps and little moves that I'm excited that there's a really easy way in the game to sort of remind yourself, refresh your memory, all this stuff. And the way that people are going to, I am so excited for this game to come, just to see what people do, because there's just so many new combinations, new parts, and it's going to be so exciting.
Yeah, people are going to do some wild things that certainly the dev team never imagined that could happen. When you test this many elements that can interact with each other and just throw it out there for so many people to play, it's gonna get wild.
Yeah,
absolutely. So before we close out the Super Mario Maker 2 discussion, what are some final tips you guys might give? If maybe even say some of the most important tips that anybody can kind of apply to their own levels to make great courses.
So one thing it might be obvious to a lot of people, but maybe not to newer makers, is that when you're making a course, you can press minus, and that'll drop you into playing your course wherever you're at in the level. But if you press and hold minus, you'll play it from the start. And it's important to, when you're making a section, to always play it from the start to make sure everything kind of loads in, that the timing of things works out. So I'll usually do that. I'll be making things and tapping into play and sort of working them all out as I go, but I always take time to restart from the beginning to make sure if I'm running through it or walking through it, that everything's happening in the right, just the timing is working out the way you expect it to. Same thing when adding a pipe and making a sub area. Make sure you go out of that pipe and back in to make sure that maybe enemies you've added or traps or triggers, that you kind of realize that timing. You don't want to, you'll eventually you'll have to play the course to upload it, but you can save yourself a lot of trouble by playing it from the start, making, so that you don't have to you make a whole course and then realize, this isn't quite right. Like, what's going on here?
I gotta say thanks for that tip, because I knew you could press obviously minus to start playing the course you're making in the moment. I didn't know that if you held it, you start at the beginning. That's pretty helpful.
Yeah, it's great. You hold it and you kind of, and then it drops you in right at the start, as if you had started the course, naturally, and that's great for sort of testing out that full-on run through.
I'd say another thing people might not know is that if you click in on the sticks, you can also zoom way out or zoom way in. But if you zoom way out, you can see the entire, for example, 2 full screen height of a horizontal layout, and you can also grab a lot more in that from that viewpoint. And I always think that really gives you a great kind of overhead macro view of not just the one particular part of the level you're working on, but all the levels or parts around it. So that's another great thing to use, I think, when you're building a level.
Yeah, I've been using that a lot, the view mode, because I really go all in on the aesthetics of the courses. Even if there's something way at the top of the screen and maybe no one will see it, I like to sort of fill in the block. I don't know, I go really overboard with that stuff. But from that view mode, when you're zoomed out, you can't select a new part to add in, but you can multi-grab anything you already have there. You can copy it, so you can fill in those large swaths of ground blocks, or you can copy element. Like if you're adding coins, you could just switch to copy, and from that zoomed out mode, you could do an artistic layout with coins just by copying one you already have. People are going to really, I think, use that a lot for that. Exactly what you said, that bird's eye view. and just sort of stepping back. It's like a painter stepping back from their, from their painting and like, look, okay, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I would say my tip is think about the aesthetics of your level. Think about how your level looks to a new player who's never seen it. I do see a lot of levels that are like kind of have just too many elements in them. There's nothing wrong with a level having just Goombas for bad guys, or having just certain materials or focusing on certain colors. I think the aesthetics really add to the experience, and there's kind of an art element to it. You have this huge palette of parts that you can place anywhere, but that doesn't mean you should place everything anywhere. I think things like, for me, one of my pet peeves is when people have just like floating dirt blocks, in the air that aren't really supported by anything. I'm just like, that maybe those could be bricks, and you can take kind of inspiration from actual Mario games, like they're never going to have floating dirt blocks because dirt doesn't float. But in Mario's world, in Mushroom Kingdom, hey, bricks can float. That's just how it is. And I think you can do a lot of cool things with, these platforms that basically add to the background, right? So,
the semi-solid platforms.
Yeah, the semi-solid platforms. Basically, you can have, if you want to have dirt suspended in the air, maybe throw a semi-solid platform that looks like it's holding it up, so there's some sense of gravity to the environment. I think that really adds to the experience for the player who's playing through it, and like, wow, that is actually really cool. Even if they're just running by it, at as fast as they can.
Yeah.
I think it helps.
Yeah, Eric, I think when Ethan and I think Eric has always, and again, this is just a style we were using. I mean, you could do whatever you want in Mario Maker, but having these things in mind, I think really sort of help you. Ethan, Dill, and I, when we were making courses, we sort of had Eric's it's like Eric's philosophy of course aesthetics in mind, because even when I was making the final course, I wanted icicles, but I didn't want just an icicle attached to nothing, but I wanted it attached, so I would use a semi-solid. I was like, what would Eric do? Okay, I'll use a semi-solid brick thing, add that in the background, and then have the icicle right at the bottom of it. So it kind of looks like it's maybe hanging off something. And doing that, I think actually, it might seem sort of superfluous when you're like, oh, that's not even gameplay, but it really does, by sort of thinking, how is everything in this course supported? What's holding things up? Where are things coming from? It really, I think, will make your course feel more real and inspire you to sort of keep putting more and more finishing touches on it.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and it reminds me of some of the lessons in Yamamura's dojo where they talk about the atmosphere you create and how simple changes in the parts you use and the arrangement can really create a different kind of feeling in the player. So I think that's hugely important for sure. One thing that I'll add is I'm pretty bad myself at just sitting down in front of the screen and just coming up with something on the spot. And when I do, and I'm kind of building in inches, I tend to kind of work myself into a corner. So what helps for me is to just go away to some scratch paper and start sketching out different ideas. And for one of my stages recently, I found it even really helped. I sketched them down really quickly on index cards because I had all these ideas for different parts of a stage, but I didn't know how they would fit together. And then I was able to reshuffle the cards and kind of put them in different configurations until I felt like that was a good pacing. And then I filled in the gaps, and that really helped too. So I think don't maybe sit down and, just like you wouldn't have someone sit down and just freehand draw a final illustration without first roughing it out. I think the early work really pays off in the end.
That's a good point. And yeah, that's definitely one way to go about it. And I personally prefer that method, but there's something to be said for just going into the software and kind of taking stuff and throwing it everywhere and see where it lands. And, that's at least a good way to come up with new concepts or ideas, which you can then refine further.
Exactly. All right, well, thanks so much. And I mean, I could talk about Super Mario Maker 2 all day, but we're running out of time, so we got to move forward. And we're going to next talk about Players Pulse. And as always, we usually go out to Twitter for Players Pulse and ask the fans to answer certain questions. And this time, actually still keeping on the Super Mario Maker 2 theme, we put a poll up. And what we wanted to know was here just days before the release of Super Mario Maker 2 as we're recording this. We wanted to find out which new feature or part players were looking forward to trying first. Not just, I'm sure they're looking forward to multiple features in the game, but what are they going to dive into as soon as they get their copy of the game? And I thought it was very interesting, so I'm going to share the results so far with you here. 30% said they were looking forward to trying story mode first. Obviously, that's going to be a huge part of the game. 27% want to dive into multiplayer right away. 23% really are looking forward to playing others' courses as the first thing they do. And then 20% want to start really digging in and making their own courses right away. So pretty even spread between the top ranking one here and the bottom. It's only about 10%. I think it just speaks to the broad range of things you can do in Super Mario Maker 2.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. People are excited about those things. And for me, story mode is absolutely incredible. The first Super Mario Maker game didn't pay necessarily as much attention to the story mode because the game's the main focus is creation and playing other people's courses. But this time around, the story mode is totally full featured. And it is super fun. Some really challenging stuff that you're not necessarily going to see in a mainline 2D Mario game. And I'm really excited to see how people like it.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing I'm going to do too. Even though I want to jump in and start making my own, I'm going to actually play through the entire story mode first because I haven't seen all of those courses yet. I didn't get a chance to play all of them when the game was in localization. And I know that even the dev team. Having talked to Mr. Tezuka at E3, he's even so excited about those courses, like what the dev team was able to do, because they were able to really make all these courses in that story mode that sort of show you a different take on a different part or a different theme or a different style, and each one is sort of a different way to look at something or a different little inspiration, and they all have that polished feel of a real course that I think people are really going to take a lot of inspiration from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's a great place to start too, because those courses do such a great job of introducing the new parts and really teaching you how everything works. So I think after you've gone through a bunch of these courses, then you'll have a much better idea of what's possible when creating your own courses.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, we're going to move on to Pros Picks. This is where we talk about games that we've personally been enjoying lately. Eric, you want to start us off? What have you been playing lately?
Sure. I am a huge Secret of Mana fan. That is basically the reason I'm here today, working at Nintendo is Secret of Mana. So when we announced Collection of Mana at E3, I was like, because I didn't even know, to be honest, and I was like, And I went out and bought it as soon as it became available.
That's great. I've got that one ready to go on my Nintendo Switch and just haven't started yet. Too much Super Mario Maker 2 lately. But it's one of those franchises that I've always heard great things about, but for whatever reason, I missed out on it. So I feel like now's my time to catch up.
Yeah. Secret of Mana, so good. I feel like everyone needs to play that game from start to finish.
I hurt in high school. I hurt my knee and basically spent an entire summer on crutches. And a friend of mine lent me his Super Nintendo. I didn't own one, and Secret of Mana.
Ooh, nice.
It's Secret of Mana to me. Sorry.
My bad. I grew up saying Mana, but Mana, tomato.
Yeah, I played that game for an entire summer. I can't think of, in hindsight, I'm like, that friend, thank you for Super Nintendo plus that game.
Yeah.
It was basically
so good.
Yeah. Good summer.
That's great. Well, Morgan, what have you been playing?
So I also have a Trials. It's not Trials of Mana, but mine is actually Trials Rising. I am such a huge fan of the Trials series. I love Red Lynx, the developer. They're part of Ubisoft now, and
Ubisoft. It's fine.
Yeah, Ubi. That's another one. Mana. I know. I love the Trials games. I love Trials Rising. It's as somebody who I talked a little bit about. I really like speedrunning games. I like moving through platformers fast. And, even though Trials Rising, it's a sort of Trials motorcycle game, it's basically just a high-speed platformer with really simple, tight controls. The course is all about sort of how fast can you get through a course and then shaving. I could sit there and play the same track over and over, shaving milliseconds off my own time. I love the physics of it, the feel.
It's so good.
It's a game I want to have with me. It's sort of the controls, it's a few buttons and the sticks, and I love it.
That's great. Yeah, I remember playing, I think, a previous game in the series and just trying to shave off that next little fraction of a second.
Yeah, if you like game, like platforming and gameplay and just like really tight dialed controls and sort of being able to sort of get through courses with all these micro adjustments in your speed and it's super flowy and fast and it just feels great.
It feels great, and there's this kind of hidden trigonometry stuff going on where you're like lining up angles, you know what I'm talking about, and trying to like maximize your efficiency by landing both wheels at the exact same time at the same angle, and then, you know, hitting the gas at the right time. And it's actually a really deep game.
Yeah, like you're doing all these micro adjustments to like shave some milliseconds, but yet you're also going really fast and flying off these huge jumps and through midair and
almost like a bit of an evolved Excite Bike, because even back in that old game, you had to, you know, how you landed on your wheels was such an important part of the gameplay.
Yeah.
The original Excite Bike. Yeah, I think it seriously goes back to that. In the original Excite Bike, when you could make your own, tracks. If you, there was this crazy thing. I'm probably one of the only people that figured this out. That if you set the jumps just right, you actually could build momentum in the original Excite Bike, and you would get more and more momentum off longer and longer jumps until you would come out of the top of the screen. Like you would like go out of the top of the screen and out of the bottom.
Right.
So I would build these courses where you'd like build up all this crazy momentum. So yeah, that's probably where your
Super Mario Maker course creating style started.
I didn't even have thought about that. I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, great. For me, I've been playing mostly Super Mario Maker 2, but I have made some time for a couple of games. Contra Anniversary Collection, as an old school, 8-bit Contra fan, I was super excited to see that show up. Great for people that aren't familiar with the series, great arcade style run and gun action. These are great games for 2 players. And this collection has 10 games, including the original Contra from the arcade, and I think the one most people probably remember, which is the NES version of Contra. Plus, my personal favorite in the series, which is Contra 3: The Alien Wars from Super NES. And I've really been enjoying playing through Contra Hardcore, the Sega Genesis Contra. Again, it's been years and years since I played that one, so I've forgotten most of it. So that's been a lot of fun. And then also there's a Castlevania Anniversary Collection that I got right before that. That was great. And then got a Roboto. I mentioned this in the previous episode, but that's been a great kind of Metroid-style game where you're actually a cat in a powered mech suit, which is pretty hilarious. And then seeing the reveal of Hero and Banjo-Kazooie for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate really got me playing Super Smash Bros. Ultimate again. And now I've gone through and collected all of the spirits associated with the Joker DLC, and I've started to unlock more stuff and just started to chip away again. That's a hard game to even come close to 100% on, but I have this long-term dream that I'm going to get there one day, so chipping away at it.
Yeah, that is a big game. There's so much to it, and I don't even know how you 100% that game. It's just there's so much content.
Yeah, I think you just keep going till you realize you've done as much as you can.
It's true.
All right, well, next up, we've got Warp Zone. This is the quiz where I'm going to give you guys some clues, and you're going to try to guess some games that came out 10, 20, and 30 years ago. We're going to be looking at games, all of these released, again, 10, 20, 30 years ago in the month of June. Ready?
Let's do it.
Ready. Are we a team, or are we competing against each other?
Oh, snap.
Usually it's every man for himself, but if you guys want to confer first and team answer, then we'll go that way.
All right, let's go.
All right, 10 years ago in June of 2009, here are the clues. Nintendo published this platforming game for Nintendo DS, and it was the first installment of a long-running series to come to the US, but in Japan this was actually the series' 5th game. And in the game, your bright, cheery character swims, spins, jumps, and slides his way to victory in and around the ocean. Any guesses?
Would that be Starfy?
Starfy.
Yep, that's it, the legendary Starfy.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of people might know this character, even if they don't know him by name, might know him from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where he's an assist trophy. Hits you with his star spin.
I remember when that game came. Eric and I were. That takes us right. We've both been in the Treehouse about 10 years, 11 years, right about when that game came out. Because I remember there was a promotional, like a full body costume, Starfy costume that somebody came walking through the Treehouse wearing like a full body Starfy.
I forgot about that. It was this giant Starfy costume.
Yeah,
it couldn't fit down the hallway.
Yeah, it couldn't fit down the hall. You had to walk sideways because it was like too wide.
That's awesome.
That's great. So if he'd done the spin, he could have done some real damage.
Yeah, seriously.
All right, next up, we've got 20 years ago. This is June of 1999. And the clues are Nintendo published a game for Game Boy Color that was a spin-off from a major franchise with a lot of familiar faces, in which the goal was to hit bumpers and other targets with a ball to get a high score while also collecting 151 different things. Any guesses?
Ball to hit targets and bumpers.
So the game also included 2 boards, a red board and a blue board.
I mean, this sounds 151. You got red and blue. This sounds very Pokemon, but it's not like Pokemon Puzzle League. It's like.
Sounds like. Was there? I have no idea. Was there like a Pokemon pinball game? I have no idea. I'm stumped.
Pokemon pinball.
I'll accept that. Pokemon, yep, Pokemon Pinball.
Yes.
Nice way to figure out a game that you weren't even aware of. All right, the next one is, this one's 30 years ago, June 1989. Capcom published an action platformer for NES in which you use a wide array of special powers to take on 8 tough bosses and 1 despicable doctor. This is the second game in a classic long-running series, and many fans still consider it to be the best.
What is Mega Man 2?
That's it, Mega Man 2.
Yes.
That was a crazy month, by the way, June 1989. We also had, let's see here, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Track and Field 2, and The Adventures of Bayou Billy.
Nice.
Oh man, I played so much Mega Man. I listen to the Mega Man music. Like, I don't even know from which game, but I have like a Mega Man music playlist that I use at work sometimes when I really need to get stuff done. So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when you want to fight for everlasting peace, just pop up those tunes. I can't believe that game's 30 years old, by the way.
I can't either.
That is wild.
I played a lot of Mega Man as a kid.
All right, well, really quick, before we wrap things up, we're going to go through the game forecast, and this is where we take a look ahead at some key Nintendo Switch games coming in July. Starting things off this month, we've got on July 4th, Stranger Things 3, the game from Bonus XP and Netflix.
Nice.
On July 12th, we have Dragon Quest Builders 2, and on July 19th, there's Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, The Black Order. And then on July 26th, we've got 2 big games, Wolfenstein Youngblood from Bethesda Softworks and Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Wow, that's a lot of good stuff. What pops off to you guys?
I mean, Fire Emblem 3 Houses, I'm super, super excited. That might be the easy answer because, working in the Treehouse, but I mean, seeing the work that's gone into that game, just the amount of passion from the development side, from the localization side, from everyone involved with it, the game just has so much to offer people, the fans of that series, new people to it, the story, the voices, the gameplay. It's like an epic. It's not even understatement. It is an epic game, and I'm really excited for people to dive into that world.
Yeah, I've been purposely trying to avoid that one so I can actually enjoy it when it comes out.
Yeah, me too. I've been really looking forward to that game, and I wasn't always a big fan of the series. It was Fire Emblem Awakening, I think, that was the one I really jumped in on, and I've gotten every one since, so I can't wait for this one.
Nice.
Eric, what are you looking forward to?
For me, I got to say Wolfenstein Youngblood. I mean, I'm a big shooter fan, and have been playing Wolfenstein since the original Wolfenstein 3D on PC. So
for like a 46.
Yeah, 386 even, man. I'm super excited for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too. I'm really looking forward to all these, but just one that you guys haven't mentioned yet, Stranger Things 3.
Yes.
Which is, I'm a huge fan of the television series, and I'm really looking forward to the season 3. But the game looks to have that pixel art style and kind of that old school beat 'em up kind of gameplay that you don't see very often these days. So I'm really curious to try that game and hopefully like it as much as I like the show.
Yeah, me too. I love the show. I'm excited to watch it when it comes out and play the game. And it's cool that they're synchronizing the launch of the show and the game at the same time, which is super awesome.
Yeah, both on July 4th. I've got to make sure I watch the show first so I'm not spoiling the show when I play the game.
I'm sure they've taken that into account. They're not going to throw spoilers in the game.
Just play and watch at the same exact time. It'll be maybe it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way. All right, well, Morgan and Eric, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. It's been super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think you said it earlier, but yeah, we could talk about Super Mario Maker 2 all day. I'm so excited for people to have it in their hands now, and I can't wait to play all the courses that are maybe being created right now.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Nintendo Power Podcast. If you have any comments or questions you'd like us to consider answering on the show, you can email us at nintendopowerpodcast@noa.nintendo.com. Also, we always appreciate it if you can leave us a review, and be sure to subscribe so you get new episodes as soon as they're ready. Thanks for listening, and keep playing with power.